Well, good evening. I'm Charles Schultz, and I'm with Schultz Laboratories and Universe Science Center. And this is the randomizer for Thursday, February 17th, 2022. And tonight's topic is going to be about some microbes. What is an archaeon? We're going to talk about some of the most primitive organisms on Earth and how they've been around for at least 3.8 billion years. Fossil records show existence at least 3.5 billion years back, and some suggest even further. So they would have been around within the first 700 million years of the Earth's history and possibly earlier. This is just as far back as the fossil record shows them. We're going to talk about their relation to you, to life in general, and the controversy that they've stirred up recently in biological circles. So I want to encourage people to come to the Universe Science Center, universesciencecenter.com, schultzlaboratories.com, either site. Click in and join us Mondays at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our Meta World lessons that are going on right now. Lesson 4 starts on the 21st, and it talks about explosive growth and limits. It's about humanity's progress from sticks and fire to nanotechnology. And also every weekday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, as you probably know, the randomizer. Join us here, click through to the link, and it'll take you to the page. When you wait for the page, time's out, and it'll automatically bring you to this meeting. So thank you for all the people who have joined and who are supporting us and the growth we've been able to make. We've added some new things to the Science Center, and we'll talk about that very shortly. Welcome to Jim Diaz as well. Thank you for everybody showing up. So tonight, archaeon. An archaeon is a tiny microbe, and it has a very specific difference from most of the living things on Earth. If we look at everything on Earth, we can classify how everything is related, how all the plants came together to some common ancestor in the past, how all the fungi did, how all the animals did, and we go right back down the branches to the very root of the tree where some hypothetical first organism was the progenitor of it all. If we go down to that point, we find that right after that, it split off into two directions. Now, some of the living forms that we see around us are composites, and we'll talk about that in just a second, including humans. But when this tree splits, one half of the tree is the bacteria. And if you look at the number of species of animals, there are more species of bacteria than just about anything else. And bacteria are actually fairly complicated organisms. And then the tree splits into another direction, and it becomes the archaea. And that means ancient, very early. And if you know anything about biology from classes in school or college or whatever, they talk about eukaryotes, prokaryotes, and bacteria, the three different types of things. And actually, prokaryotes were at the very root of the tree. So when they split off to become bacteria, one family of them went off and had their own abilities and did their things. And here is where the controversy starts. Eukaryotes are complicated organisms, and archaea are very simple. In fact, one of the things that distinguishes them is the fact that they can eat amazing things like butane or petroleum or minerals, and they can live in the most horrible environments you can imagine, high temperatures. They have enzymes that can do basically biological processes for industry. They generate the methane in your gut, for instance. They have high temperature catalysts available inside them, which means that in the past they were in some pretty horrible circumstances. High temperatures, no oxygen. Many of the archaea lived in an oxygen-free world, and so they're called anaerobes. Many of them today can also stand oxygen in varying degrees of tolerance. What really sets apart an archaea type organism is that it doesn't have a nucleus in its cells. Now you'd think, how can an organism function without a nucleus? Well, the fact is they're very simple, and their genetic material literally floats around in the cytoplasm, the liquid inside their cell membrane. So archaea are extremely primitive. Now here is where it gets interesting. When you look at bacteria, they don't have mitochondria, and mitochondria are like the battery packs of the cell. They generate and store the energy. They turn ADP, adenosine diphosphate, into ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And that's provided to your cells, and that provides the fuel to energize all of the reactions. And if you look at a cell, a typical cell like an animal or plant cell, you'll find that there are many complicated structures in it. I've often said that biology is natural nanotechnology, and it is. Your cells contain the nucleus, which is the library where all the chromosomes with their file cabinets have all of your genes laid out, the sheets of instructions that tell your cells what to manufacture and how. And then you have mitochondria, the energy packs of their cells, the batteries. You have all sorts of structures like the Golgi apparatus and the endoplasmic reticulum and lots of crazy names. You even have a sort of a 3D printer in your cell called ribosomes. They take the instructions and they print out the protein molecules or the enzymes. So it's a complicated factory, and all the instructions proceed from the nucleus. So how does a cell live without a nucleus? It basically has its genes floating about in the cell, and they're often in round loops called plasmids, or in strands that kind of bunch up in various ways. And so they're very simple, as I said, and they can eat just about anything. If you go in a cave and you look at the structures of the minerals, stalagmites and stalactites hanging from the ceiling and growing from the floor, the stalactites hang down, and what a lot of people don't know is the formations in those caves are made by the digestive actions and secretion actions of very simple primitive organisms, many of them that live without oxygen. So this accelerates the growth of a cave. It isn't just rainwater becoming acidified by dissolving carbon dioxide out of the air and then seeping into the ground. It would take many millions of years for a cave to form like that. And they actually can form in a few thousands of years, it's found. So these are some of the organisms that make that happen. So this is where it gets very interesting. When the tree of life splits off to bacteria and archaea, there was a controversy because the archaea went in two directions. Some feel that it split into a factory called eukaryotes and archaea, and others feel that the archaea had a branch that went off and became eukaryotes. Well, what the heck is a eukaryote? A very fascinating thing happened very early in the history of life on Earth. Bacteria already existed, and some were very good at specific tasks. And the archaea existed, or something very similar to it. And at one point, an archaeon, that's the singular form, engulfed a bacterium, and instead of dissolving or eating it, the bacterium took up residence within that cell. Now, very interesting things are happening here. The bacteria found an environment in which they could thrive without destroying the host. And the benefit to the host was that it now had something that effectively took care of its energy budget for it. And so this is called a commensalism, or a symbiotic relationship. When you have a symbiotic relationship, you have two organisms working together to make some things happen. But when they become one, it's more like a commensalism. Now, this is not an unknown thing. Many organisms on the earth do this, and notably lichens. Lichens are actually not a single organism. They are not a species, so to speak. They are a combination of a fungus and an algae. And the two work together, and they give each other new abilities. Lichens are so hardy. They were flown on an open tray on the outside of a spacecraft for 2 weeks, exposed to vacuum and sunlight, raw ultraviolet, came back to Earth, didn't bother them a bit. So when you have a cooperative system of this sort, you get new abilities. And some would argue that the whole environment of the Earth is a cooperative system of that sort. Yes, it is. But it's easy enough to divide out an organism from that and maybe set up an environment for it that it will live quite successfully. When you reach the stage of an animal, you're generally more sensitive to an environmental condition than a microbe would be. Microbes are like, you know, steel bolts and welds and nuts and hammers, and they get in there and they eat minerals and poisons and compounds that we would never imagine. But they are the foundation of everything that happens. They build the soil and everything. So what's important here, however, is that the archaea, which are these simple, sometimes anaerobic organisms that can digest, some can eat stainless steel, by the way, that's pretty amazing. When you look at them, you don't think there's much there. But in combination with some unknown bacterium that took up residence within, they formed the eukaryotes, which are the foundations of all the complex things on Earth. All of the plants, all of the animals, all of the fungi are eukaryotes. So if you were to examine your cells inside, you would find those mitochondria have their own genetic code that is slightly different from yours. This is amazing. And it's been discovered that there are between 11 and 15 different genetic codes on Earth, and most of them designed specifically into the functions of certain bacterial species or archaeon species. And so there are differences you can track, and you can see at some point in the past where they diverged. And we can track the branches of the tree of life based on their biochemistry. What's interesting is the mitochondrial DNA are only passed through the mother of an organism and not the father. So we can track them all the way back by looking at the mitochondrial DNA and see what the very first female of that species shared and where it changed over time. And this is an amazing thing. It gives us a separate time clock to gauge the development of an organism, and it's a species for that matter. So archaeon is one of these simple little organisms that actually gave rise to all of the complexity of life on Earth by engulfing a bacterium at some time in the distant past, about 3 billion plus years ago. Amazing when you consider that. Now, here's another thing I want you to consider. We think of ourselves as being single organisms, a human being, but that is absolutely wrong. Let's propose a little experiment. Let's say we built a teleporter that could take just you and none of your hitchhikers, the organisms that are all over you, and teleport you away instantly and leave everything else behind. What would we see? For a moment, there would be a ghostly shadow hanging in the air made of trillions upon trillions of microbes and nematodes and mites and small things that live all over you. And they are not a part of your body, but believe it or not, they influence your metabolism, your feelings, and your well-being in an amazing, uncounted number of ways. So if, for instance, your gut bacteria aren't happy, you can sometimes feel that, and it changes your health. We have essentially become composites. You are the planet within which these trillions of organisms live. And if you think about it, that's pretty amazing. Not one of us is a single thing. We are huge commensalisms, like a forest or a sea in which these organisms survive. And everyone you meet, you shake hands with, you kiss, you share a meal with or a drink, you're swapping organisms with them. That's just astounding when you think about it. So I think that that's one of those mind-blowing facts for the day. I'm amazed when you think about it. I found out about the organisms that live in one place in the world at the base of the follicles of your eyelashes. Demodex folliculorum is the name, and they look like little wormy guys with little claws on the front. And you won't find them anywhere else. They live only in the follicles, the bases of your eyelashes. Who would have thought? We're covered with skin mites. We have tiny little organisms like worms. We have things walking all over our bodies all the time. So that's an amazing lesson. We're all a part of the tree of life and carry thousands or millions of species with us we're not even aware of. So at this point, I'm going to open the floor to questions, and I hope people have some interesting ideas or thoughts or things they would like to know, and I'll try to answer it. So fire away. And meanwhile, I'm going to hawk my wares. Go to schultzlaboratories.com or universesciencecenter.com, sign up as a member, become a supporter, and see some of the things we're developing. I was showing off a little earlier today the addition I've put in, the Sky Index. So all of our rooms and our exhibits are going to get index rooms, just as when you buy a book, there's an index or a glossary if it's a technical book. And this gives you the advantage of learning some of the terms and their application before you dive into a subject. And behind me, you will see the Sky Index, which shows how astronomy works, how we locate the stars and planets. And so we have a model of the Earth spinning on its axis, and we explain the celestial equator, the plane of the ecliptic, and navigation in the sky and how it's all related. And so I think that you'll get a lot of thrills out of just understanding how that works. How did the navigators come up with this system so long ago? And the most important thing about that is to consider that our Earth is not vertical in the plane of its orbit. It's tilted 23.4 degrees. And so you'll see this circle off the side here that's raised up. That is actually the plane of the ecliptic. That's the sun's equator extended out into the solar system. That's the area where all the planets pretty much orbit, in that plane. Some are a little high, some are a little low, but that's where it all happens. So I hope that you'll take some time when you have an opportunity, when I open that room up to the public within the next day or two, that you'll have a chance to get in there and get familiar with the terms and start studying the sky. It's pretty amazing. Okay, so once again, if there are any questions, the floor is open, and we will take them now. And if not, I'll assume everybody knows it. Well, I thank everybody for joining me for the randomizer tonight. The subject matter is always interesting and different. We'll pick a new random subject tomorrow. And join us, support us. We're going to grow, and we're going to get this system out there so people all over the world can spend some time in the virtual world learning about amazing science and technical subjects. And we're going to start something pretty soon, a robotics course, and I'll give you some information about that. So I have a question here. Archaea originated from, let me go to the texting here. Here we go. The archaeon area, that's correct, and created most of the Earth's oxygen and only exists without the cell's nuclei until 7.5 million years. Okay, not quite. Archaea were not photosynthesizers, and some of them did make some oxygen by reacting water, sulfur, and iron compounds. But it wasn't until we had some organisms like simple plants. They were a type of bacteria, actually, that had chloroplasts, the ability to, they're called blue-green, I'll think of it in a moment. They are bacterial forms that are very much like an algae, and they had the ability to photosynthesize. The earliest photosynthesis organisms on Earth were purple in color, most likely, and you see purple plants today. However, later, because of a photosynthesis arms race, the green plants were able to become very efficient, and they produced all the oxygen. Stromatolites, which were colonial types of these blue-green organisms, similar to chlorella, they were the ones that really started making a lot of oxygen. The banded iron structures we see that we actually mine for our iron ore were the results of these oxygen producers. Now, this is an amazing story. If you look at the banded iron structures in the fossil record, you'll find a strip of red iron oxide, and then you'll find a layer where it's gone, and then you'll find another strip, and then it's gone, and another strip, and it's gone. Why? The answer is amazing. The organisms produced oxygen and vented it to the atmosphere. And the oxygen had nowhere to go except into the ground, the minerals, and it would react with it and be taken up. And so for a long time, these oxygen producers could just dump their toxins into the environment. But at some point, the minerals in the soil saturated, and the oxygen level in the atmosphere went up and up. And remember, these guys were not oxygen breathers. They were anaerobes. And the oxygen poisoned them and killed them off. And almost all of them died. And it took millions of years for the oxygen to get used up by eroding the minerals in the soil. And then when that happened and the oxygen level dropped low again, the organisms began photosynthesizing and setting up more iron oxide. And so you will find bands where they poisoned themselves off and recovered, and poisoned themselves off and recovered. And you'll find these numerous stripes laid down of iron ore, and it was because they poisoned themselves over and over again. That's an amazing discovery. So here we have a question. And actually, the oxygen levels on Earth were high enough around 600 million years ago for what we see as the Cambrian explosion. And during that time, the Earth was in a phase called snowball Earth. The oxygen levels were high enough at that point to have a real influence on how organisms develop. And remember, oxygen is a key to high energy life. If you have a non-oxygen environment, there's a limit to how much energy an organism can generate and expend, and a limit to its complexity. It's when the oxygen gets to a certain critical level that the organisms adapt to it and use it that their metabolisms go off the chart. And then you can get animals and really complicated things. So, how close is the spirulina to the cyanobacteria that exists today? All right, that's a good question. Spirulina is actually a form of algae, and cyanobacteria are not truly a plant. They are bacteria. So it's a different thing. Spirulina is truly an algae, and it comes in long, fibrous stands. It looks like little cylindrical cans fused together. And you know, a lot of people don't know this, but spirulina and other forms of algae can literally send a bridge over to other cells and swap some genes with them. So this is the first instance of the beginnings of what sexual reproduction was. It began with cells swapping information that way, and later it became more sophisticated. So there is a big difference between the two. And the Earth's oxygen reached a critical level 600 million years ago, and another one later. We look at the life in our seas and wonder why it didn't come out onto the land for so long. Very simple reason. Before there was enough oxygen in our environment to make an ozone layer, life was trapped in the seas. And all of its complexity and development had to happen there, because if you came out of the water on the land, you got scorched. And an interesting footnote, many of the stromatolites, the early cabbage-like layered organisms that did some of the earliest photosynthesis and made huge quantities of oxygen for the Earth, many of them actually create a natural sun blocker. They have the genes for that. Well, what does it tell you? You wouldn't need those genes unless ultraviolet was an issue. So we see some signatures of ancient changes that occurred in these organisms over the millions of years. So I hope that answers the question for you. Now, anything else? And you know I'm going to go on and on. So well, all right. I hope that was helpful, and I hope you learned some cool stuff. And I'm going to call it and make the end of the randomizer. Thank you, everybody, for showing up tonight and for your questions. And I appreciate your being here and your support. And we'll have a lot of other cool things happening on the next one. And keep your eyes on the Universe Science Center and see how it's expanding. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening and make the world a better place. Oh, one thing. I found something quickly here. One who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much. And one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. And that's from Luke 16:10. Watch what people do. Watch how they act. And you can often gauge the character of an individual by how much attention they give to the details. You know, they always say the devil's in the details. Absolutely. So thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. Make the world a better place. And we will talk again very soon.